Hi, I'm Tony Northup, and for my book Stunning Digital Photography, I'm here with Chelsea, whom of course you know, and my friend Samantha from Samantha Annette Photography. She's a portrait photographer that we originally met at one of our reader get-togethers, and in the past year that I've known her, I've seen her photography just get really incredible. She's really doing some amazing work now. And we're here today to talk about portrait photography equipment. We have 3 different setups here, and we each have a great deal of experience with different types of gear. So the first thing I'd like to talk about are lenses. I think it's the most important part of your gear.
This is the Sigma 70-200 2.8 lens. I just recently acquired this lens, and I'm really happy with it.
Sigma, but it's on a Nikon body, right? It must not be as good. Why did you get a Sigma?
This lens actually is about $1,000 less than the Nikon version. I did a lot of reviewing on lenses. I looked at the Tamron, I looked at the Sigma, and I looked at the Nikon. A lot of the benchmark testing showed the Sigma to be almost equal in every way to the Nikon version, and for what I use this for, I would never notice the difference, so I decided to save $1,000 and go with the Sigma, and it takes fantastic images.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. There are subtle differences, like the name brand models tend to be just really durable, like tanks, and sometimes they have a little bit of an edge in sharpness, but with portrait photography work, I don't find that sharpness is as critical as people think it is, because, I mean, what, you're just going to see more detail in people's pores and stuff that you're going to end up retouching out later?
And honestly,
and it's still very, very sharp.
And on a 70-200 lens, typically you're going to be shooting someone that's a little further away anyway. So if I was shooting someone up close, I would be using my 50mm lens anyway, and that one is tack sharp.
And so I totally agree. Take a look at the Sigma and Tamron models. I recommend them almost every day. Tamron has a 70-200 that starts at about $760. That's brand new, and that's a great value. This Sigma model happens to be image stabilized, so it's more like what, $1,400?
I think I paid about $1,250.
$1,250. That's new.
Yeah.
And then Tamron has an image stabilized one too that people like. It's a hair better in some ways. It costs a little bit more, but it's pretty much a toss up. Now, Chelsea over there, what do you have?
I'm also using a 70-200, 2.8, but it's a Canon. This is my favorite lens to use. Like Sam said, you're shooting from a little bit farther back, but this one is tack sharp, and it has a really nice bokeh.
Mine's tack sharp too.
Oh.
Oh, it's on. I'm fighting words.
Sorry, you said the 50mm was tack sharp.
This is fairly tack sharp.
Also tack sharp.
Yeah, you know, it's just not tack sharp.
But it's not as tack sharp as mine.
It's
so speaking of tack sharp, I happen to be using a 50mm here. There are a couple of 50mm that people use often. There's a 50mm f1.8 that people call the Fantastic Plastic, or the Nifty 50. I actually have the 50 f1.4 here, which it's a little bit faster. It blurs the background a little bit more. The 1.8 typically costs around $100. It's super cheap. The 1.4, it's more like $350, $400, a little bit sturdier too. I don't think it's an ideal lens for headshots, and if you have one lens, it's not that versatile because you don't get to zoom in and out. You're stuck with a fixed focal length, which means you don't get to control the background like you can with a zoom lens. So for that reason, it's not usually my recommendation for people's first lens, unless their budget is stuck at $100. There's only the one lens at $100, and it can do a decent job. But I think one of the challenges is just the focal length. If you get close into a headshot with the 50, it kind of distorts the features some. It makes your forehead and nose look a little bit bigger than they really are, and that might be okay with kids, but it's not something most women would like to have in a photo. Maybe we can quickly take a couple of sample shots just to show the difference between like 50 and 200mm and how it changes the facial characteristics. Might I take a picture of you?
Sure.
Okay. A shorter focal length does completely change the picture. Not only does it change the facial features, but it shows a lot more of the background, which can introduce a lot more distractions. So it actually takes a lot more skill to use that shorter focal length.
If you check Chapter 6, you'll see more examples of why the longer focal length is more flattering for features and doesn't distort them as much.
So let's talk about the next most important characteristic, which is the minimum f-stop number of the camera. My 50 here is an f1.4, and these are both f2.8. Those are pretty small numbers. Like the kit lens that came with your camera, it probably has a minimum f-stop number of like f5.6 or so. And that gives you a couple of benefits. Like, most importantly, it lets you blur the background really, really nicely. It gives you that really short depth of field, and that's so important with portraits because you're going to see every distraction in the background. If there are cars or other people, or even just flowers or something, if it's not blurred out, it's going to be distracting.
Another reason why I like the short depth of field is because you can get the eyes in focus and the skin will actually be a tiny bit blurred, which is just a bit more flattering for a portrait.
My lens doesn't have image stabilization. These both do.
Yes.
What's your take on image stabilization?
I am very grateful for image stabilization because I have a shaky hand.
I agree. I'm the same way. I don't have a very steady hand. Even when I prop my elbow up against my body, I still do get some camera shake. So I like a lens with image stabilization.
Yeah, image stabilization definitely helps. However, there's this big price jump. For example, you can get a 85mm f1.8 that's not image stabilized, and that's one of the lenses I recommend for beginning portrait photographers. And it's about $350. The first image stabilized portrait lens you can get is probably that Sigma there at like $1250. So that's a big leap if you want that image stabilization. So I think it's a nice to have, but really for most portrait photographers, it's not a need to have. If you're shooting out in the sunlight, absolutely don't need it because you're going to be shooting at 1/4000th anyway. And if you're in the studio, you'll have enough light that you won't need it.
And your flash freezes also, right?
Yeah, the flash can really help too. Where you really need it is if you're in a darker environment. And wedding photographers, forget it. A wedding photographer absolutely needs it because you're shooting indoors a lot. So keep that in mind. It's a nice to have, but not a need to have. So another difference between our lenses here is zoom versus prime. A lot of people swear by prime lenses for portrait photography, but me, even though I'm using a prime right now, I really like the versatility of a zoom. So Sam, you shoot with both zooms and primes.
This is the first zoom lens that I've had. I do still like my prime lens a little bit better, but I think it's more of a comfort level. I haven't shot a whole lot with this yet.
Yeah, it definitely does take practice. With, like you mentioned, you get that sneaker zoom with the prime lens, and when you do back up, if you want to go from a headshot to a body shot, suddenly the whole background changes too. Suddenly you show so much more of the background, and you have to take that time to move back. So you can still get the shot. It just takes a little bit longer. It takes a little more planning. With a zoom lens, I can go from a body shot, and then if I like the expression the model is giving, I just zoom right in, and I have a headshot like that in less than a second, instead of needing to move and reposition her and think about how the background is going to change. So now let's talk about the camera bodies. I think we all agree Canon is better than Nikon, right?
Yes, Sam said that before.
Yeah, we've seen Sam's pictures, and the reason they're not good is because she's shooting.
Yeah.
No,
I really like both of these guys a lot. Now let's talk about Nikon.
Why did you end up with a Nikon instead of a Canon?
Most of the reviews I read gave Nikon just a little bit of an edge in some of the areas that I was more interested in.
Well, and I shoot Canon because when I bought my first camera in 1998, I just happened to pick up a Canon at the camera store. And then switching seems like it would have been a pain. So, and honestly, it just didn't matter that much. Like Nikon has great cameras, Canon has great cameras, and so people get really passionate about it. So they'll see me with a Canon and think that I think that's the right answer, but I wouldn't care. I'd switch to Nikon in a heartbeat. Or
I would too. I mean, I just had all of his lenses, so why would I choose Nikon?
I'm pretty sure Chelsea just held my camera and said, "Wow, this is really easy and awesome to use."
It is actually. I like some of the controls. They seem more intuitive. So.
Yeah, there are lots of little differences, and they go either way. But either body is going to let you get the shot. You know, a more important factor is really sensor size, like full frame versus crop. I'm using a Canon 70 here, and that's a crop frame, but I've used other crop frame cameras. I would say my go-to camera when I have the choice is a full frame body. What do you have there, Sam?
My very first camera was the Nikon D5100. It was a crop sensor body, and at the time, when I didn't really know that I wanted to do photography a little more seriously, it was suitable. When I discovered that I wanted to take this a little bit further, I realized that I would need a full frame body. And so I did end up buying, this is the Nikon D700. This camera new, just the body is about $3,000, which is out of my budget. But I did find a used body for about $1,500, and it is clean. It's a great camera. I've had zero problems, and the previous owner took great care of it. So it worked out really well for me.
What about you, Chelsea, with your expensive setup over there? What you
I
got?
have the 5D Mark III. I usually shoot on the 5D Mark II, but I like the 5D Mark III. It's fast, it has a lot of focusing points, and it's a great camera.
They all get the job done, so I don't think it matters all that much. I'll say the crop bodies, They have a little bit more noise in the pictures, but it's
That
not
was
a big
very
deal.
noticeable to me
Yeah.
when I switched. It was.
For me too. When I
Right.
use the 7D, it's too noisy for my case. I prefer the Mark II or the Mark III.
It's going to be okay if you're shooting in direct sun, I think, at least in
Yeah.
my opinion. But anytime you're even in the shade and you got to go up to ISO 800 or so, you're going to get a lot of noise, and especially with skin. It starts to look like they have skin problems or something, and really you're making them look worse than they actually are. So you can crank up the noise reduction, or you can really smooth their skin, but it makes it more work for you, and it doesn't come out looking that nice. The other big factor with portrait work is depth of field. Bigger sensors give shorter depth of field, so you can blur that background a little bit better, about 60% better. So that's an added bonus, but you can get a used 5D Mark II for about $1,200, but a new body, they start at about $1,500, $1,600 for a D600 or a Canon 6D. So that's a pretty big price tag. Whereas the crop bodies, you can get a decent body for $300. And I promise, as long as you're careful with it, most people aren't going to know the difference. So full frame better. But
I didn't think I would notice the difference that I noticed, but I was very happy with what I was using. It's sort of like you don't know if you've never driven a Porsche, you don't know you're missing a Porsche. But the second I had this, I realized how great it was. But I was very happy with shooting with my Nikon D50-100, and the early clients that I had were happy with their pictures. So.
yeah, and do yourself a favor. Don't pick up your friend's 1D or D4, because then you'll really hate your
Before
camera.
you're ready to buy one.
Yeah. I think focusing points are another big factor now. Focusing isn't as important as it is with sports or wildlife, because your subjects aren't moving that fast. But a good focusing system can really make the whole thing go much smoother. If you have a bad focusing system, sometimes you'll see it hunts, and it kind of takes a while to really lock onto that eye. You might find that there are plenty of shots where the eye isn't quite perfectly sharp, and then you have to throw that shot out, especially if you're using a fast lens like one of these with the really shallow depth of field.
I noticed a big difference between the focusing points with the Mark II and the Mark III. The Mark III focuses a lot faster. So I've been frustrated before with the Mark II. I know I'm spoiled, but sometimes you just miss an expression or you miss a moment because it takes a little while to hunt and focus on your subject.
Yeah, and they're farther out on the Mark III too. They're pushed out more towards the corner, so if you want to compose your picture with the subject out towards the right or left third of the frame, well, the Mark III has a focusing spot there. A lot of other cameras like the Mark II, they don't. So you end up doing this focus and recompose thing, focus, recompose. And that works, you can get the job done, but when you do that, the focusing is never precise. You're moving, and the focal plane isn't bending the same way that your camera is, so you lose the focus a little bit. You can make up for that by just taking lots of shots or trying to manually focus it, but it's hard. It slows things down. It's better to have those focus points farther out.
It's definitely a big difference on this one as well.
Yeah, they're farther out.
Yeah, yes, much. I find that I would have a lot of misses with the crop sensor body, and even though I felt like I was right on, it would still be a little bit of a miss. And this, I find that it's almost dead on all the time.
One more thing about the bodies, the megapixels. A lot of the time people want these high megapixel cameras like the D800. What's been your experience? Does megapixels matter that much to you?
This one only has 12, and I have never really noticed the difference. My D50-100 was the crop sensor. That one had, I think, 16. Don't quote me on that, but it definitely had more than this. And this takes better pictures, so I don't think...
So nobody complained that you couldn't see enough detail in their
No way,
pores?
never. No, I get actually sharper, better, clear, everything. I mean, unless someone was going to go like super mega giant poster, I don't think that there's going to be any problems.
Yeah, so something like the D800 might be useful if you were doing fashion photography and they need to shoot, large format. But for the average portrait photographer who prints 8x10s, 11x14s, any camera, any modern camera is absolutely fine. I just don't think megapixels are much to worry about.
I will say, we've had some large prints. We printed, 18x20?
We've done billboards.
Yeah, we have done billboards. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
I didn't have a problem with the megapixels.
Yeah, nobody ever complained.
No.
So flashes are important for portrait photography too. They basically add front light, and you have it attached to your camera, so they're really convenient and easy to use. I don't think anybody really likes that traditional flash look, so it might not be plan A, but I still find them really important. How do you use flash, Sam?
I tend to use as little flash as possible. I like to use a reflector, and I like to use the reflector to catch the flash and bounce it back onto my subject. So sometimes I'll have someone hold the reflector above my head and bounce the light up and out. And sometimes I have the reflector behind me, and I shoot the light backwards so that it comes forward. There's not too many situations where I blast flash right onto somebody. I think it looks very unnatural, and that's just my personal taste.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I prefer diffusers or bouncing the flash, but I'm not gonna lie, I went to a family picnic and I just stuck a flash right on there. Actually, it was this exact flash, and I don't aim it directly at them, and it's simple, so I will use more of a direct flash.
Yeah, flashes are great for candids and events because it just stays attached to your camera, and you don't have to worry so much about moving indoors or outdoors or different types of light because your flash just kind of automatically adapts to all that. I'll say that I look for a flash that has a bounce head because they don't all have that.
Yeah.
I also look for a flash that has TTL. Now, I have here the Yongnuo YN560, and it's a manual flash, and I primarily use it off camera. However, it's a really good bargain. It's like $60 or something. So a lot of people grab it and think it's going to be their main flash, but then they find that as the lighting conditions change, the flash doesn't automatically adjust the output because you have to manually push these buttons to move it up and down. That's why I really push people to get one of the TTL flashes. Now, all the Canon and Nikon flashes are TTL. They're also pretty expensive. I encourage a lot of people to check out the Yongnuo generic flashes. They have two models that have TTL, the YN468-2 and the YN568. Those are both great flashes at $100 and $200. The higher end one has more power and high-speed sync. So give those a look, especially if you're just working with on-camera flash. They're a much better value than the Canon and Nikon equivalents. Thanks so much for watching our video. If you want more information about portrait equipment and techniques, check Chapter 6 of our book, Stunning Digital Photography. You can find links in the description. And if you want to buy it, go to stunningdigitalphotography.com and use the coupon code YouTube. Of course, you can also get it from Amazon, so go there and check out the reviews and see if you like it first. Check out our Facebook page, and of course, you need to check out Samantha's Facebook page. Samantha Annette Photography, and we'll put a link in the description for that as well. If you like more videos like this, click like and subscribe down below. Thanks so much.